Now, trans fatty acids do exist. And in fact, you've probably heard of them. We call them trans fats. These are formed synthetically by doing a reaction in which we dehydrogenate. So we're actually forming a double bond. This is a type of reaction you talked about in organic chemistry. You form a double bond in a fatty acid. So you're making a unsaturated fatty acid. You're taking a saturated fatty acid, making it unsaturated. And when you synthetically do this, it will form a trans bond instead of a cis bond. Trans bonds are actually more stable, they're more favorable. It just so happens that naturally, based on our enzymes and in natural organisms, cis double bonds are the ones that we find. So cis double bonds are less stable. That is true, but they are the natural ones that we find. So when you do the reaction synthetically, a trans double bond will be formed preferentially when you make a double bond in a fatty acid. Now, because you formed a trans double bond, it actually lets the fatty acid stack better. It gives it a better conformation, and then they thus have higher melting points than the cis form. What this language means, is that when you form a trans fatty acid, even though you're putting a double bond into the fatty acid, it does not kink. So you can imagine here's our two fatty acids. Here's one with a cis double bond, and here's one with a trans double bond. The trans double bonds don't kink, and they can stack just like an unsaturated, or excuse me, a saturated fatty acid. So they have higher melting points. Trans fatty acids tend to be solids at room temperature, even though they have double bonds. So this is a way that you can take something that would usually be a liquid at room temperature and make it a solid at room temperature. So, for example, margarine is usually made up of a fat that was an oil. It was saturated, it had no double bonds, but it's a liquid. It's then dehydrogenated to make trans double bonds. And when it does this, it will stack, it will form a solid, but it has these double bonds in it still. Now, because these double bonds are not the natural ones our body is used to breaking down, these trans fats actually will increase risk of cardiovascular disease. So generally, they should be avoided. You can find, if you see anything that says it is hydrogenated oil, it'll tend to be more of a solid. But if it's hydrogenated, that means it has trans fats in it. And there's many pushes currently to reduce the use of trans fats in our consumption because they are harder to break down, and they because they stack so well, because they can form plaques, because of the stacking, they increase our risk of heart disease.